Hi, everyone. Bob Dietrich here with the ADHD Toolbox. And once again, we have Dr. Edward Hallowell here with us. Dr. Hallowell, welcome to the show.
Nice to be with you, Bob.
Well, we're not going to go into all the background credentials because it was on the first one. If people want to know who you are, haven't heard of you yet, which I would find hard to believe, then they can go back to the first episode. Instead, what I'd like to do is focus on a lot of content here today. And again, we're running the ADHD Toolbox for the second time because people have found it so valuable to hear from people like yourself about ADHD and see it from a new perspective. And I love what you're doing with trying to change the narrative around it, and the narrative around it being a disorder and more of it being the potential for a superpower or this strength. And I know you have something that you call a strength-based approach. So I'd like to start there and talk about this strength-based approach and tell us what that is and how you work with your clients on it.
Yeah. Well, ADHD is just a terrible term. I have the condition myself, and I can tell you I don't have a deficit disorder. You tell someone they've got attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. What a mouthful of pathology.
Mm-hmm.
And if it were accurate, that would be one thing, but it's completely not accurate. There's no deficit of attention. If it were a deficit, it would be a form of dementia, which it isn't. It's not a deficit of attention. If anything, it's an abundance of attention. The challenge is to control it. And then to call it a disorder, well, some of the most amazingly successful people in the world have this. Most entrepreneurs have it. David Neeleman, a serial entrepreneur, he founded JetBlue Airlines, then he went on to found himself. He's on his fourth airline founding it. People like that, they don't have a disorder. They have an extraordinary power. And can it be a disorder? Yes, it can if you don't manage it right. That's the prison population, the addicted population, the unemployed. So it's what makes it so interesting. It can go one way or the other. And my job as a clinician is to maximize the upside and minimize the downside. And one way you do that is right at the beginning to name it properly. And don't tell a child or an adult that they have a deficit hyperactivity disorder. I mean, golly, what a way to get someone off to the wrong start. Who's motivated to deal with that? And so what I tell them much more accurately is you've got a race car for a brain with bicycle brakes. You've got this tremendous asset, this powerful, fast, nimble brain, but you have trouble controlling it. Your brakes need work. You have trouble, stopping when you should and going when you want to, and all the various attendant issues that come into play. But if you learn how to strengthen those brakes, if you learn that this trait can become a tremendous asset, as it does for so many millions of people, then the sky's the limit. You can succeed at the highest levels. But if you don't, then yes, it can be a terrible curse, can be a terrible disorder. That's why it's important that parents understand it, teachers understand it, and adults understand it. Still, the biggest undiagnosed group are adults, and it's often a parent brings their child in for an evaluation. The parent says, gee, that sounds like me as well. And that's really how we started diagnosing adults. If you do it properly, this is a good news diagnosis, because things can only get better. Once you know that you've got it, once you know what's going on, things can only get better. How much better? That's up for grabs, but certainly better than where you started from. So what I mean by a strength-based approach is, I try to root what I do in looking for strengths, identifying strengths, and in the process, we have to deal with weaknesses. We have to deal with what gets in the way of the development of those strengths. But it's, the reason I love my work is every day I get the chance to bring to people news that can change their lives for the better. It's unique, really, among all diagnoses in psychiatry, in that it's good news when you find out you've got it, because, as I say, things can only improve.
Got it. So it sounds like management is the key, but I heard you say a kind of a two-step process. First, what are the strengths, and then manage the challenges. Is that the kind of the
Well,
high?
no. You want to know what the problems are too. You want to know, who are you? I mean, that's my question when someone comes to see me. Tell me about yourself. What is your story? I don't hand out a bunch of checklists and computer programs and all that kind of stuff that other places do. I sit down and say, tell me your story. Why are you here? Where have you been? Where do you want to go? And that will naturally entail hearing about what you're up against in terms of struggles, and what your interests are, and what your hopes are, and what you're good at. I mean, oftentimes these folks, regardless whether they're 10 years old or 50 years old, they're not even aware of what they're good at. So I have to ask them, what have other people praised you for, or where have you encountered success? And then you put together a composite picture, and what's getting in the way of your realizing your dreams? What's getting in the way of your doing better in school? They might say, well, I'm not that smart. Well, so how do you know? How do you know you're not that smart? Well, that's what I've been told. And I can tell them just in a conversation how smart they are. I'll say, well, in fact, you're very smart. They'll say, how do you know? Because they don't want to be sold a bill of goods. And I'll tell them, by your vocabulary, by your sense of humor, by your ability to appreciate irony, by your observing my office and picking up on little things, by your ability to ask questions, even your ability to ask me, how do I know you're smart? Someone who isn't smart doesn't ask that question. So, I'm able to show them very quickly that they're smarter than they think they are, which is almost invariably the case. Whatever smart means, they have more of it than they think they have. And that really often is the major problem, is that they are selling themselves short because they've been told along the way that they don't really have that much going for them. And so it's up to me to kind of show that's not the case, that they have far more going for them than that they're aware of. And once again, I have to back it up. This is not blowing smoke. This is not sloganeering. This is not spin doctoring. I have to back it up with factual statements, as I just did in explaining how I can tell someone they're smart. But I've been doing this, a long time. I've been in practice since 1981, and I've learned a lot. I know a lot, and so I'm able to, with the voice of experience, unlike some experts, I see patients every day, not on Sunday, but on Saturday, and I'm able to explain it to them in a way that they can understand. Race car brain with bicycle brakes, anyone can understand, and it's very accurate. And it also affords a way of intervening that doesn't shame. If you say to someone, your brakes are failing you, and that's why you reached out and slapped that kid, or that's why you snatched the donut off the table, or that's why you impulsively screamed out something you shouldn't have. Your brakes failed you, as opposed to you're a bad boy or you're a lazy girl. Your brakes failed you. You weren't able to control what your brain was leading you to do. And say, but don't worry, I'm a brake specialist. And the same with these adults. I mean, adults, the biggest undiagnosed group, and they typically are underachieving. They could be doing so much more. And again, they don't think so. So it's up to me to prove to them, to plant the seeds of realistic hope, of how much better they could do. The first adult patient I ever treated in one calendar year had collected 124 W-2 forms. Think about that. That means he was getting hired and fired pretty much every other day.
Wow.
And it was a testament to his tenacity that he'd keep getting hired.
Yeah.
And also a testament to his impulsivity. He would just pop off and get fired. And his IQ tested was 160. When I met him, he had the only job he could hold with, that was as a night watchman. But after we got diagnosed and treated, he ended up being the foreman of the company where he'd been the night watchman, once he learned how to control what he was going to say. And that, because that was so many years ago, that is a standard story, in my office now. People come in, adults who are underachieving, and next thing you know, they've got a whole new lease on life.
Yeah. I was talking to Dwayne Gordon in the first ADHD Toolbox. Similar story. He was having all sorts of different problems with his job and things like that. Once he started to get it managed, in his case through through medication, he was able to um, solidify a job, hold a job, and eventually became president of ADDA.
Oh,
That's
that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'd like to talk about two things that we haven't talked about yet. First of all, what do you do when you have a young child, 4, 5, 6 years old, that hasn't been diagnosed yet, but you think they got ADHD? And then secondly, what are the management strategies that you recommend so we can understand where we go from here? If we think we've got ADHD or we've been diagnosed, how do we start managing that so we can get to those higher levels of achievement? So first question, relating to the children, what do you recommend to a parent who has a young child and has not been diagnosed yet?
Well, bring them in for an evaluation. And, the best test for this condition, there is no real test, but the closest thing we have to a test is the history. So you tell me the child's story as reported by you, by the child, and maybe most important of all, the teachers or the caretakers, whatever level they're at. And then if it fits the description of ADHD, I say, let's say it's a little boy, I say, I have great news for you. You've got a really powerful brain. You've got a Ferrari engine for a brain, and you've got a race car. But your brakes are on the weak side, so we need to strengthen your brakes. And they get it. They get it right away. And you framed it in a strength-based fashion. The headline is powerful brain. And then the footnote is, well, we got to work on those brakes if you're going to win races, which your brain entitles you to do. Management begins right there. Framing it, education, good news. So this is something, if you work on, you'll become a champion. So you've started management right there. It begins right then and there. It begins with, inspiration and hope and, okay, sky's the limit.
Right.
And I might say, have you ever flown on JetBlue? The man who founded that has the same kind of brain, and, what have you. And then, then it's a matter of adding structure to his or her life. I go to bedtime, I get up time, rules. These kids and adults, for that matter, do much better with structure. So somebody who's setting limits and can say no when you need to say no, and get you to bed on time, because getting enough sleep is important, and then eating properly is important. Eliminating sugar as much as possible, trying to stick more toward the closer you can get to vegan, the better, but you don't have to do that. And a lot of people do better gluten-free, some do better lactose-free, so you can be your own experimental animal and see under what kind of nutritional regimen do you do your best. Physical exercise is tremendously important. Regular physical exercise is really, really good. And then a new form of exercise that specifically targets stimulating the cerebellum, turns out can have real positive effect. And if you want to learn more about that, just go to the Zing program. Go to distraction.zingperformance.com. distraction.zingperformance.com. And that'll tell you about this particular regimen that it's just 10 minutes of targeted exercise twice a day. Can really help unwrap the gift, as I like to say. Positive human contact, really important. A lot of times these kids and these adults get nothing but reprimands, redirection, correction. That gets to be old pretty fast. So yeah. You want to have positive human contact. You want to have encouragement. You want to have attaboys and attagirls. And the same for adults. Believe me, adults need it as much as anybody else. So you want to build that in. If they can learn meditation, that's great. Lots of evidence that helps. And then discovering where you have a talent and trying to develop that talent. Having a creative outlet. These kids and these adults usually are quite creative, and you need to have a creative outlet. The reason I write so many books, I'm just finishing my 21st book. If I don't have a book going, I get depressed. And typically these kids and adults, for that matter, if they don't have some creative project they're working on, they feel logy. They feel like someone who hasn't had exercise. Well, they haven't had that kind of exercise for their brain. So try to identify and develop a creative outlet can also make a big difference. those are the basic tools of management: structure, education, first of all, then structure, nutrition, sleep, exercise, cerebellar stimulation, if you want to try the Zing program, meditation. And then, of course, there's medication, which is just a tool in the toolbox. It doesn't always work, and it's certainly never necessary. But if you want to try medication, when it does work, it's remarkable. It can be as effective as eyeglasses. And you want to see a doctor who knows what he's doing, because you want to eliminate side effects. The goal is to have target symptom improvement, i.e. improved focus, executive function, with no side effects other than appetite suppression without weight loss. You usually do get appetite suppression, but if you start losing weight, you've got to stop the meds. So you want to make sure you maintain food intake. Any other side effects are immediately reversible by lowering the dose of the medicine, changing the medicine, or discontinuing it altogether.
Got it. And what types of medicine are out there that adults or parents should be familiar with?
Well, the gold standard are the stimulant medications, and they were first used to treat what we now call ADHD in 1937. Mm-hmm. So we have some 80 years of experience with these meds. There's basically two molecules. There's amphetamine, which was what was used in 1937. And then there's methylphenidate, which came along in the early 1950s. Amphetamine is best known by their trade names, Adderall, or extended release Adderall, or Vyvanse, or then the new, even longer lasting called Medeas. And then with methylphenidate, that's Ritalin, Focalin, Concerta, which is long acting, Metadate, Detronopatch, Quilivant. Those are all different formulations of methylphenidate, but it's essentially those two molecules, methylphenidate and amphetamine, that are, have different versions based on duration of action. And so you have two variables you're controlling: the duration of action and the milligrams, the intensity. So it's intensity and duration. And there's a lot to dial in there. So, you want to be sure you see a doctor who's had enough experience to know how to do it. Some people say, well, I had a trial of medication, but that doesn't mean they had a trial of different doses of different medications. So a trial of but again, good news when it comes to meds, they're so fast acting. They take effect in 20 minutes to half an hour. And so you'll know pretty quickly if you're getting the positive result.
Now, amphetamine, that's something that stimulates you and speeds you up, right?
Well, it's called a stimulant, but in fact, it stimulates the brakes. So it allows you to put on your brakes more effectively. It gives you more of the capacity to reflect before you act.
Got it. If you tried Adderall, for example, and because it's in the same class as Vyvanse, is it possible that you could switch to Vyvanse and Vyvanse will work?
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, you could try. If you try any one of them and you change to another one, there's a very good chance it'll work. Maybe you could move from Adderall to Ritalin, go from amphetamine to methylphenidate. If one doesn't work, it doesn't mean another one won't.
Right. Now, some people that I've talked to have said that trying non-drug solutions first would be a effective strategy, because once you try the medication, that you can't tell if the non-medication solution will work. For example, the Zing program. Would you say that's true? Would you recommend to try medication strategies first and then go to the medication, or what strategy would you recommend?
I'd recommend doing them simultaneously. It shouldn't be either or. I mean, you can be doing the full range of non-medication interventions, and you should be, while you're trying the medication. It's not we do one or the other. It should be both. You should always implement the non-medication interventions. Education should always be part of the program. Structure and coaching should always be part of the program. Proper nutrition, sleep, exercise should always be part of the program. The optional elements are the specialized form of exercise, the Zing program, for example, or medication, again, optional. But there's no reason to wait on that because it's not like taking meds in no way reduces the efficacy of the non-meds. Quite the opposite. If you're taking meds, you're likely, and they work, you're more able to follow the regimen of the non-medication routine.
Got it. Got it. Now, one aspect that I've become aware of lately, a lot of people use this, is coaching. Why is coaching effective with ADHD?
Well, why is coaching effective with anything?
Yeah.
You know, coaching is good for everybody.
Right.
The only caveat is you have to want it. It's
Right.
not going to work if you don't want it. If it feels like nagging, then it's not going to work. You know, and that's sometimes when, you know, like coaching from your mother, the nag factor can get in the way because it doesn't feel like coaching, it feels like nagging. So, you know, so you want to be sure that the coaching is felt, is wanted, you know, but if it's wanted and the coach is, you know, knows what he or she is doing, then it's tremendous. I mean, you know, we all benefit from being helped in terms of making progress toward our goals. And so a coach not only offers pointers, you know, this is how you should organize this and this is where you should put that, but also implicitly is giving you encouragement. The coach is, you know, they're rooting for you. The coach is invested in your success. And that really helps. People underplay the power of encouragement. Encouragement is tremendously important, particularly these days where there's, you know, people are actually more isolated than is good for them. They're electronically connected, but emotionally kind of isolated. And that's where a coach can have a big impact, just in the ability to encourage, inspire, redirect, and, you know, assist.
Is there a big difference in ADHD coaching or just regular life coaching, or is it pretty much the same thing?
Well, no, ADHD means the person just has to understand that if the person doesn't follow through, it doesn't mean they're not motivated. It's that they have ADHD, they forget, and their procrastination is not willful, it's not passive aggressive. It's part of the condition. So the ADHD coach needs to understand ADHD, that we naturally forget things, we naturally forget details, we naturally procrastinate. It's not that we're lazy or undisciplined, you know, and if we show up late for our coaching session, it doesn't mean we're avoiding the coaching, although it could, but it more likely means that we just forgot about it. And so that's sort of, then the coach would say, then what strategy can we come up with that you won't forget about it? And maybe it's a wristwatch, maybe it's an alarm system, maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a sign on the door. Those are all different kinds of ways that you could next time not forget.
Yeah, or maybe the coach calls the calls the person being coached.
Absolutely.
I think that can be a great strategy. It's interesting though, because in the coaching I've seen, that when I'm late for a call, I always feel bad about it. And what you said with regards to encouragement, you want to go the opposite direction of that. You don't want to feel bad about being on a coach call. You want to feel good about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so if it's 20 minutes late and it's like, oh, I got to get on this call, you don't want to be like feeling bad about getting on the call. You're like, hey, I'm so excited to talk to you. I lost track of time. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, this is great advice. I was glad to go a little deeper this time, talk a little bit about the strategies that we had. And, you know, we work with so many young families and young children. And it sounds like it's vitally important that the parents don't get sucked into this idea that there's a disorder here, that they start the narrative early on. And it seems like that might be the most important thing that a parent might take on and work with their kids on. Would you agree with that, or is there something that you might recommend that's more important?
No, Bob, I think that's absolutely right at the top of the list. You want to embrace this as a marker of talent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't treat disabilities, I help people unwrap their gifts.
Yes.
And that's what you want to see it as. Yes, it takes work. Yes, it's more than just taking a pill. Yes, coaching and organizing, learning new habits, that takes work, but it's in the service of becoming a superstar. It's in the service of becoming someone, you know, tremendously accomplished, and not only success, but feeling good about life. you know,
Yeah.
developing that creative outlet, you know, having that passion, that thing you want to work on. And that's huge. That's tremendously important. So yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right to say that's the starting point, that we're embarked on a journey toward discovery in a very positive way.
Yeah. Well, maybe one day we'll have a series of videos of people like yourself that have risen to success with ADHD and talking about their success stories that will be inspiring and powerful for others.
Well, that would be wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Hallowell. I appreciate your time today. And thank you all for watching this edition of the ADHD Toolbox, and how ADHD can actually be a superpower rather than a disorder that we're so accustomed to hearing. So thank you, Dr. Hallowell. Thank you for being
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
We'll see you guys on the next edition of the ADHD Toolbox.